The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the throne room, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor. Evan had been working in the royal palace for 3 years, invisible among dozens of servants who kept the machinery of royalty running smoothly. At 26, he'd learned to keep his eyes down, his voice soft, and his presence forgettable. Today, he carried a leather portfolio containing trade agreements that required Princess Celeste's signature. The document courier had fallen ill, and Evan was ordered to deliver them personally. Princess Celeste stood near the eastern window, her dark hair cascading over shoulders draped in emerald silk. At 23, she was known throughout the kingdom for her beauty and her silence. She rarely spoke in public, maintaining an air of untouchable grace that made her seem more statue than woman. "Your Highness," Evan murmured, approaching with the portfolio extended. "The trade documents require your signature." She turned, and for a moment, their eyes met. Hers were storm gray, intelligent and searching in a way that made his breath catch. She reached for the portfolio, and that's when it happened. Her fingers brushed against his, skin against skin for barely a second. The touch was innocent, accidental, inevitable given the exchange. But the sharp intake of breath from the corner of the room told Evan he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Lord Bastian, the Queen's chief advisor, stood frozen in horror. "Guards! Seize that man immediately." The words barely registered before hands grabbed Evan's arms, wrenching them behind his back. The portfolio clattered to the floor. "Wait," Evan started, but a hand covered his mouth. Princess Celeste's face remained eerily calm, though something flickered in her eyes. "Lord Bastian, surely." "The law is absolute, Your Highness," Bastian interrupted, his thin lips curving into what might have been satisfaction. "No common man may touch royalty without permission. The dungeons await him." Evan struggled as they dragged him backward, his mind reeling. He'd heard rumors of the old laws, relics from paranoid kings of centuries past, but he'd never imagined they were still enforced. Princess Celeste watched him being hauled away, her expression unreadable, one hand still extended where she'd reached for the portfolio. The palace dungeons were cold and damp, carved from the bedrock beneath the castle. They threw Evan into a cell that smelled of mold and desperation. The iron door clanged shut with terrible finality. He slumped against the stone wall, his mind racing. For touching a princess's hand. For an accident that lasted less than a heartbeat. The injustice of it burned in his chest, but beneath the anger was fear. He'd heard stories of servants who'd displeased the court. Some were never seen again. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Evan wrapped his arms around himself and wondered if anyone would even remember his name. Evan didn't know how long he'd been in the dungeon, hours or days, time lost meaning in the perpetual twilight. He dozed fitfully on the stone floor when the scrape of metal jolted him awake. The cell door opened, and a hooded figure slipped inside. Evan scrambled backward. "Who?" "Quiet." The voice was female, commanding. The figure pushed back her hood, revealing Princess Celeste's face, now stripped of its public mask. Her gray eyes blazed with intensity. "We don't have much time." "Your Highness." Evan stared, wondering if imprisonment had driven him mad. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you, potentially. Or recruiting you." She crouched before him, close enough that he could smell jasmine and something sharper, ink, perhaps. "That touch this afternoon wasn't coincidence. I engineered it." "You, what?" "I needed someone arrested, someone I could access down here without suspicion." Her words came rapid fire. "I've been investigating a conspiracy against my mother, the Queen. The trail leads here, to the dungeons, but I can't search them alone without raising questions." Evan's head spun. "You had me imprisoned as part of an investigation. Would you have helped if I'd asked nicely?" Celeste's lips quirked. "Besides, you're in danger anyway. Lord Bastian wanted you arrested because you're the document courier's assistant. You've been handling sensitive trade agreements, you might have seen something you shouldn't." "I haven't seen anything unusual," Evan protested. Then why did Bastian look so relieved when I accidentally on purpose touched your hand? Celeste stood, pacing the small cell. He's been trying to find an excuse to remove you for weeks. The touch gave him one. Evan processed this, his anger shifting to something more complex. So I'm bait? You're an opportunity. She turned back to him, and in the torchlight from the corridor, her face was striking in its determination. Help me search these dungeons. There are sealed chambers down here that even my mother doesn't know about, places where prisoners disappear. I need to know what Bastian is hiding. And if I refuse? Then you rot here for violating archaic laws, and I find another way. Celeste crossed her arms. But I'm offering you a chance to matter, Evan. To be more than invisible. She knew his name. Somehow, that surprised him more than anything else. How do I know this isn't some twisted game? He asked. Celeste knelt again, and this time she took his hand deliberately, her fingers warm against his. Because I'm trusting you with the truth. Bastian is planning something that will destroy my mother's reign. I can feel it. And I'm running out of time to prove it. The touch, this sanctioned, intentional touch, sent electricity up Evan's arm. Her hand trembled slightly, betraying nerves beneath her confident exterior. What do you need me to do? He heard himself say. A smile transformed her face, making her suddenly, devastatingly human. First, we search. Then, we survive. She produced a key from her cloak, unlocking his shackles. The guards change in 20 minutes. We need to reach the lower levels before then. As Evan followed her into the labyrinthine darkness beneath the palace, he realized his life had already changed irrevocably. The question was whether he'd live long enough to see where this path led. The dungeon sprawled deeper than Evan had imagined, a warren of corridors carved through living rock. Celeste moved with surprising confidence, a small lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. How do you know your way? Evan whispered. I've been mapping these tunnels for months, she replied, not looking back. The palace architect's original plans showed 3 levels. We're about to enter a 4th that doesn't officially exist. They descended a narrow staircase, the air growing colder and damper. At the bottom, a heavy door stood ajar, its lock broken recently by the looks of the fresh scratches on the metal. Someone's been here, Evan observed. Celeste nodded grimly. 2 nights ago. I've been waiting for a chance to investigate. She pushed the door open, revealing a chamber that made Evan's blood run cold. The room was a prison within a prison, chains mounted to the walls, a table with leather straps, instruments that could only be used for torture. But what caught Evan's attention were the documents scattered across a desk in the corner. Celeste rushed to them, her hands shaking as she read. Oh gods! Oh no! What is it? Trade agreements. The ones you've been handling. She looked up, her face pale. They're forgeries. Look, these signatures aren't my mother's. Someone's been creating false treaties, selling our kingdom's resources to neighboring states at devastating prices. Evan moved closer, studying the papers. That's treason. It's worse than treason. It's systematic dismantling of our economy. Celeste's voice hardened. Bastian has been doing this for years. When the kingdom collapses financially, he'll blame my mother, position himself as the solution. A sound echoed down the corridor, footsteps, multiple sets, approaching fast. We need to hide, Evan hissed, but Celeste was gathering documents, shoving them into her cloak. No time. Help me. The door burst open. Lord Bastian stood framed in the entrance, flanked by 4 guards. His thin face twisted with rage. Your Highness. How disappointing. Bastian. Celeste straightened, every inch the princess despite the dungeon setting. I suppose you'll claim this is all a misunderstanding. I'll claim you've lost your mind, sneaking into forbidden areas with a criminal. Bastian's smile was cruel. No one will believe your accusations. A hysterical princess and a low-born thief, who do you think the court will trust? My mother is dying. The words hung in the air like poison. The physicians have given her weeks at most. A wasting illness, they call it. Such a tragedy. Celeste's face drained of color. You're poisoning her. Prove it. Bastian gestured to the guards. Take them both. Separately. Make sure the servant understands the consequences of touching royalty. The guards advanced. Evan moved instinctively, placing himself between them and Celeste. Run, he told her. I'm not leaving you. You have the documents. You're the only one who can stop him. Evan grabbed a chain from the wall, swinging it at the nearest guard. Go. For a heartbeat, Celeste hesitated. Then she bolted, slipping past the guards with surprising agility. Bastian shouted orders, but Evan kept fighting, using the confined space to his advantage, keeping the guards bottlenecked in the doorway. A blade caught his arm, burning pain that made him gasp. Another guard tackled him, and suddenly he was on the ground, multiple bodies pinning him down. The last thing Evan saw before something struck his head was Celeste's figure disappearing into the darkness, the documents clutched against her chest like a promise. Evan woke to searing pain and the smell of blood. His hands were chained above his head, his body suspended in a way that made his shoulders scream. The chamber was different now, smaller, darker, with Bastian sitting calmly in a chair before him. She abandoned you, Bastian said conversationally. The princess ran while you fought. Typical royalty, using common people as shields. Evan said nothing, conserving his strength. Where did she go? Bastian leaned forward. What was her plan? I don't know. It was the truth. They'd had no plan beyond escaping. Bastian sighed, standing. A pity. I'd hoped to avoid messiness. He nodded to someone behind Evan. The first blow came from behind, a rod across his back that drove the air from his lungs. Evan gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. The interesting thing about torture, Bastian mused, is that it's not really about information. It's about breaking the spirit. Making someone understand their powerlessness. Another blow. Another. Evan's vision blurred with pain. Then, miraculously, the beating stopped. Shouting echoed from somewhere distant, growing closer. Bastian's face tightened with alarm. The door exploded inward. Queen Moira herself stood in the entrance, flanked by royal guards, real ones, not Bastian's corrupted security. Behind her was Celeste, disheveled but triumphant, holding the documents like a weapon. Mother, Celeste breathed. Thank gods. The queen looked older than her portrait suggested, her face gaunt with illness but her eyes sharp as flint. Lord Bastian. I've just reviewed some very interesting documents my daughter brought me. Along with testimony from the royal physician about certain supplements you insisted I take daily. Bastian's composure cracked. Your Majesty, I can explain. You've been poisoning me. Slowly. While simultaneously bankrupting my kingdom through fraudulent trade agreements. The queen's voice could have frozen the sun. Guards, arrest him. Charge, high treason. As guards swarmed Bastian, who screamed protests and threats, other soldiers freed Evan from his chains. He collapsed, barely able to stand. Celeste caught him, her arms surprisingly strong as she supported his weight. I'm sorry, she whispered fiercely. I'm so sorry you suffered for this. You saved the kingdom, Evan managed through gritted teeth. We saved it. Her hand found his, squeezing gently. I couldn't have done this without you. The queen approached, studying Evan with interest. The servant who touched my daughter. The man who gave her the distraction she needed to investigate, who fought so she could escape. A thin smile crossed her lips. It seems the old laws served a purpose after all, though not the one intended. Mother, the laws are barbaric, Celeste started. are hereby abolished, the Queen interrupted. Effective immediately. Along with about a dozen other archaic statutes that serve no purpose but to maintain fear. She looked between her daughter and Evan, something knowing in her expression. Take him to the royal physician. See to his wounds. We'll discuss his future when he's recovered. As Celeste helped Evan from the chamber, he heard the Queen order Bastion's co-conspirators rounded up, her voice strong despite her illness. With the poison's source identified, she would recover. The kingdom would survive. Your Highness, Evan said quietly. Celeste, she corrected. After everything, I think we're beyond titles. 3 weeks later, Evan stood in the royal garden, his wounds healed to scars. The palace had transformed, Bastion supporters had been exposed, real trade agreements renegotiated, and the Queen's health improved daily under proper care. But the biggest change was personal. You're brooding again, Celeste said, appearing beside him. She wore a simple dress today, her hair loose, closer to the woman he'd met in the dungeon than the public princess. Thinking, Evan corrected. About what happens now. Now you accept my mother's offer to join the Royal Council as trade advisor, Celeste said practically. You've proven you can't be corrupted, and you understand the documents better than anyone. A servant on the council, Evan said dryly. That'll go over well with the nobility. The nobility can adapt or leave. Celeste moved closer, close enough that he could smell jasmine again. Things are changing, Evan. They have to. A kingdom that treats accidental touches as crimes isn't worth preserving. He turned to face her fully. Over the past weeks, as he'd recovered and she'd helped her mother restructure the government, they'd spent countless hours together. Working, yes, but also talking, really talking, in ways that made the barriers between their worlds feel increasingly irrelevant. That touch wasn't really accidental, was it? He asked quietly. Celeste's cheeks colored slightly. No. I'd been watching you for weeks, trying to figure out who I could trust. You were kind to the other servants, careful with documents, and you never tried to curry favor or play political games. She paused. And I noticed the way you moved, the intelligence in your eyes when you thought no one was looking. So you had me arrested. So I created an opportunity. She reached out, taking his hand deliberately, as she had in the cell. I'm not apologizing for that. But I am asking, was I wrong? About trusting you? No, Evan admitted. His fingers intertwined with hers, a gesture that had become familiar over their late-night planning sessions. Though your methods could use work. Celeste laughed, a sound he'd discovered he loved. Noted for next time I need to recruit someone for a conspiracy. Let's hope there isn't a next time. Agreed. Her smile faded into something more serious. Evan, I know this is complicated. Our positions, the court politics, the fact that we met because I had you imprisoned. He kissed her. It felt inevitable, like a truth that had been waiting for acknowledgement since that first touch. Celeste melted against him, her hands moving to his face, and for a moment, there was no kingdom, no politics, no complications, just two people who'd survived darkness together and found something worth holding on to. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Celeste rested her forehead against his. The court will lose their minds, she whispered. Let them. Evan's hands spanned her waist, holding her close. We saved the kingdom. They can't begrudge us this. You don't know court politics very well yet, Celeste said dryly, but she was smiling. Then teach me. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. Teach me how to navigate this world, how to be worthy of standing beside you, not as a servant, but as an equal. You already are my equal, Celeste said fiercely. You have been since the moment you chose to fight so I could escape. Everything else is just titles and ceremony. From the palace, a bell rang, the council meeting where Evan's appointment would be announced. Celeste took his hand again, and together they walked toward their future. The court did lose their minds, as predicted. There were scandals, whispered accusations, nobles who refused to accept a former servant's elevation. But Queen Moira stood firm, and Celeste stood fiercer. The kingdom that had nearly fallen to corruption couldn't afford to maintain the rigid hierarchies that had enabled that corruption. Slowly, the court adapted. Evan proved his worth through competence and integrity, renegotiating trade deals that brought prosperity back to the kingdom. Celeste continued her reforms, dismantling unjust laws and modernizing the monarchy from within. And at night, in the private moments between public duties, they found each other, two people brought together by a forbidden touch that became the catalyst for revolution. The old laws had said no common man could touch royalty without punishment. The new laws said nothing about who could love whom, regardless of birth or station. It was, Evan reflected years later with Celeste sleeping beside him in their shared chambers, the best crime he'd ever committed.